Good day and welcome to the Strong Ambition Podcast. I'm your host, Rhyland, and we're going to dive into a solo episode. And I'm going to help you really understand one of the most valuable experiences and lessons I ever had of mindset. And this really goes way back. This goes way back, and it's a huge part of my identity. But I think there's some tangible lessons here today because it really revolves around mindset of control, doing what you can when you can control things and when you can't. And this was a very real experience for me over the last year. This is about me being a goalie in hockey. And so I'm going to go way back. I'm going to tell you the experience about being a goalie and how I got involved. I'm going to tell you, benefits, drawbacks, and then, how that really always became a part of my life, even though I left the sport, and how I came back to it recently and how I had to battle that and where the result was this year for our team. Okay. So let's go way back here. Now, and I just want to give you context. You might think, oh, I don't really know hockey that much, or maybe this would be a boring episode. Like, I can honestly tell you that this is one of the best qualities that I have that I got from being a goalie, that it is how I handle stress. So just think about what a goalie does, right? In hockey, he's the last line of defense. He or she is last line of defense. And there's a lot of pressure because if you make a mistake on the shot that comes in, that mistake is on the board. Now, if you're a defenseman, maybe that leads to it, but you also have a goalie as a backup, right? The goalie could stop it. You're a forward, you might miss a play here or there. It's not guaranteed that a mistake is going to be on the board. It's very likely a goalie's mistakes on the board. So I'm going to go into all these details about how managing that kind of stress is extremely challenging, but extremely helpful in real life. So this started, I'm going to ballpark when I was around 12 or 13. Okay. So at the time, I was just a kid who always liked to do different things, try new things. I didn't hesitate to dive into something different. And when we would play floor hockey in the machine shed, I didn't mind the different play of, oh yeah, I'll go in net. It's something different. It's fun. There was something weird about me. I was a weird kid, right? So I enjoyed it. And I got a real good rush out of shutting people down because, oh, they thought they had it, but they didn't. And so when I was around 12 or 13, I kept wanting to try out. I was initially a defenseman and then forward, but the level 10 to 12, you're not really super athletic at this point. There are some athletes, but it's not super competitive yet. But right around when it got competitive was when our goalie at the time was actually trying to offer up the position. You're like, oh, you can play this game, you can play that. And our coach didn't like that. So the coaches asked me and my mom, but me more specifically, Rhyland, we want a full-time coach, our goalie. We want a full-time goalie that's always going to take this position for us. And, Dan's just kind of going in and out, and we want someone to do this full time. And I just said yes. Like I was like, I didn't really, you couldn't have known as a kid, it's around 11 or 12, that decision was going to be a cascade for the rest of my life. So I said yes. And I learned the sport pretty well. Honestly, a fair bit on my own. I went to like maybe one goalie school or camp, one goalie camp, but I got a lot of reps because I played for teams that weren't always good. And so, you manage and you learn on the fly a lot. But what was really impactful is just how that did have such a cascade of relationships. You're the goalie for a team. So immediately you get a lot of respect from your players. You also kind of get pinned as being the weird one. You're wearing the weird equipment. You're literally in the pipes by yourself. You talk to yourself the whole time. So this probably also complemented me being a very analytical person, which I see as a strength and a weakness, but I definitely wouldn't change. So I got very analytical because you're sitting out there just analyzing the game by yourself, right? Now, there was like relationships is one thing, play for certain teams. I actually even played for a team that was a little bit far from me. It wouldn't be my normal area, but we got a release to go play for them. And I wanted to play with them because one of my friends was from this town called St. Eustache and wanted to play for them to play with him because I'd never played with him before. And then another cousin of mine was also on that team, and it was going to be really fun to play with these guys I hadn't played with before. They didn't have a goalie. And just that one thing set up so many relationships. And then, my cousin and I ended up being best friends to this day because that's where we started as friends. And there's so many other relationships. I just, was the foundation of hockey. So that was a big part, but more of the interesting part. The interesting part is how I had to manage things. I'll never forget that day. It's still pretty ingrained in my head. Now, there was my mom, the two coaches. It was after that practice that he asked me. And they said, if you're going to do this, because the first few times I played goalie, I was like terrible and smacking my stick on the ice because I just didn't know what I was doing. And it made me angry. But I think that was a year or so before that. And this time I was starting to mature to it. And my mom had really outlined this. Like, if you're going to do this, you have to know that, you're going to have some bad games and you're going to have to let that roll off your back and then come back better. And I'll just never forget that day. That was like, if you're going to do this, you have to manage this stress. And it was such a tangible lesson. And I just, that was the foundation of my identity being brought into this kind of a stress, that you're going to mess up, but you have to deal with that. And so you'll also see this in goaltenders a lot. Some goalies are really calm, some goalies are really intense and angry. And I was the calm one. I wouldn't even get angry if a guy slashed me. I wouldn't get angry at anything. I was as Buddhist as I could be out there, just namaste. It was me versus me, less about them. And it was such a valuable experience for me as a young kid to always be focused on what can I control. And I mean, I had a lot of coaches help me with this mindset through the years. I remember Rich Lavoie, who was Ray Lavoie. He was on Ray Lavoie's dad, who was on the podcast. I should actually have Rich on as well. He'd be a great interview. He had given us this sports psychology kind of outline, and that really helped. What can you focus? The tangible actions, not the results, because you cannot control what's on the scoreboard. Now, I'm always going to try to pull parallels for those who don't play the sport, but want to understand how this can apply to fitness and life. Well, you can't control results all the time. You can't control when your body is going to lose body fat. You can't control exactly when you're going to hit your PR. What can you control? Well, I can control weighing and tracking my food. I can control the food that I purchase. I can control showing up to the gym, following my program. I can control not going too heavy or not trying hard enough. Like, I control these factors that ensure that the probability of a result is good. And so when I talk about these, I'm going to keep relating these parallels, but it is super, super effective. And I'll honestly say for life, because there have been like some very dramatic things that's happened in my life where, wow, I can't control anything here. And this is terrible. This is absolutely terrible. But I have to just take a deep breath and deal with this and just breathe through it. So when you're a goalie, I'll just give you a bit more context here. When things are going bad, it is so, so important, right? When, the game is going bad, but it's one thing if it's going bad and you're doing good. Like I had said, I played for teams that weren't inherently that good all the time. Like St. Eustache was a team who just wasn't expected to do great. And I could steal some games with us, right? Like I could be in a zone and maybe we'd beat a team we normally wouldn't. But if we lost 4-1, like not too many people are surprised. And so if I'm getting like 30 to 40 shots routinely, I didn't feel bad if I let in 4 shots. And most people didn't expect me to do much better than that. So there wasn't as much pressure there. But then when you just know you're not yourself, and there was definitely so many games like that. So you just, for some reason, aren't sure where you are on the ice, can't read. And the puck, if it was a beach ball, you couldn't stop it. And this is so hard to describe outside of just think about in life. Everything you can as hard as you can. But for some reason, you can't seem to get success. Like it can't work. It could be something bad happens at work, and then something bad happens in the car, and then something bad happens with another relationship, and then a tragedy happens, and it's just this snowball effect. And it's like, I have no control over this. And it's like, you absolutely don't. What do you have control over in that scenario? You. That's it. That's all you get to control. So scoreboard, we're down 6-1. I'm feeling terrible. And this is even worse because what I'm talking about in that life, kind of analogy is things that were out of your control that you can't manage. But what if you're not on your game? And that is really hard to manage because scoreboard's down 6-1 maybe. And for some reason, you just can't be you. You feel weak. You feel helpless. You feel like you want to run off the ice right then and there. And it's beyond frustrating. So managing that and still trying to bring your best foot forward is what I learned from that. And then also just, some real tense moments, it's a breakaway and you got to just focus and bring your best. I really got to understand psychology of being present without real formal training. And the more formal training I got over the years, the more I really got through the research and here sports performance researchers and all this stuff, and getting into boxing, I became more aware of a lot of the things I was already doing, but how I could have even been better would I had known these things previously. But getting in that experience was super valuable because you don't have a choice in life, and I didn't have a choice when I was in my sport that I had to show up. I had to keep waiting for the very next puck. It's my job. I'm the goalie. And, some teams there's no backup goalies. So in that sense, it's still just always going to be my job. And I want you to think about that in life. It's going to be your job to show up for your life. It's going to be your job to show up when the scoreboard's not going well. And you got to say, okay, well, what can I control? And I'm not going to feel good about this right now, but eventually I could feel better about it. So I want to kind of continue the story because this has a ton of context to what I've learned over time, right? Just the inability to control scenarios. So I did leave the sport competitively after high school hockey. I played juvenile hockey. I played out for 1 year. I wasn't that good. Decent little grinder, as they would say, but I didn't know what I was doing that much. But then I played in net the next year. We actually did win the juvenile, my one championship. And then I had kind of went into boxing more competitively, and that was my focus for many years. And then I'd spare for a team here and there. There wasn't a lot of pressure when you're sparing as a goalie because, well, it's not your team. You don't have to see them the next week. Oh, that was a bad game. And so I'd usually actually play decent. I just didn't always have the same mobility, and I'd get in positions that I had some mind muscle memory to, but my muscle actually wasn't capable of it. So it was still like some of the movements were there. Not quite like riding a bike, but riding a rusty bike is what I'll say. So the lessons, though, carried with me. As I said, I went through many stressful things. I went through stressful events where I once got caught by the cops for possession of drugs. I lost a friend to mental illness. And those scenarios, I had, I felt responsible for some of the result, for quite a bit of the result because of how close my friend was to me, and because of the scenario with what happened to drugs was all my choice. And I'll talk about that in another episode. But the big thing I had to do was ask myself, what can you do? What can I control and take responsibility for in the very next moment? And having this instinct of this is the stress. This is just something you actually have to endure right now. And I want you to think about that too, because that was a very tangible lesson for me recently this year. So I'll go into essentially what this year is about. This year, it was over 10 years of not playing competitive. And then my brother says, hey, we're actually putting together a beer league team. And, we need a goalie. So, a bunch of these guys, and they normally play on different teams, a bunch of guys I haven't played hockey with competitively, good players, fun guys to hang out with. It's like, you know what? Actually sounds like a lot of fun. And I finally had time in my schedule I normally didn't because I usually did evening work, and I don't as much anymore. And I was like, let's try it. Why not? And so went back in the pipes. Now there was so many learning curves here. So the very first game didn't inherently feel terrible, for the exception of the fact that literally rust all over the skates. Not just me, the skates. My pads were broken. My skates were broken. Equipment was terrible. But had a decent game. Wasn't great, but it was decent. And then the very next game, it wasn't with the same team, it was a different team, but I got super humbled, got lit up. And so I'm like, okay, I really don't know how to play this, and this equipment's terrible. And I thought it was all equipment, right? So then I sharpened up the equipment, and then I was still terrible. So just game after game, I would have a decent one, and then I'd have a terrible one. I'd have a decent one and terrible, and it was so wishy washy. Now, what was really cool about this experience, and I'm saying straight up, like how bad it was so good for me. I because I don't do any sports right now, right? Like I didn't prior to this, not since boxing. So a lot of my competitiveness and in that uncertainty really goes into my business, which is still a very competitive thing. But to practice it is also like intensely like that is also a very helpful thing. I really recommend everyone have some sort of a sport or activity that they're competitive with. And this year really reminded me of it. But you know, I was trying all these things. So I mean, one major thing I know was my training. My training was made for bodybuilding slash powerlifting. And if you look at the mechanics of most movements I'm doing, they're very forward and back, push and pull, squat and hinge, not a lot of lateral, and a goalie needs to be extremely lateral. It's one of the most unique athleticism that you would require for a sport because how lateral and rotational each joint is. So not something I was used to. I literally couldn't lift my shoulder in a position to make the glove saves I used to. I remember actually like asking myself during a game, I'm like, how did that go in? Why didn't I move for it? I knew it was going there. And I tried to do that movement with my shoulder and it hurt. So what was really remarkable was I started to look at like how my body prevents the movement, even if I know it's the right movement, because you know it's going to hurt me. And this happened a fair bit. So I had to improve joint mobility. Equipment was an issue. Even after I changed some equipment, I had to get better skates because I didn't realize how much pain I was actually in those skates until like a few skates into them. That made a difference. But even then, better mobility, better joint pain. I still needed to be centered and understand what my job was on the ice and to be at my best self. Now, here's where I want to give a lot of credit to how I got to finally practice and what I'm preaching here, because none of this was easy. There wasn't too many easy games. My team had to score a lot of goals in order for us to win at the start. You know, if your team is losing a game 10-8, it's like, wow, I really feel like they did enough. I got to do a little bit better. And so bear in mind, beer league games are usually high scoring games. It's very normal. But at the same time, I just knew I wasn't my best self. So when I was going through this, and I really recommend if you haven't been reading my blogs, this is a blog to read because I declared this. I've described all these same problems that I'm talking about: lack of control, uncertainty, like feeling terrible, but embracing it. So a goal goes in. I had a routine. Okay, take a breath. I might skate away. I just immediately ask, what could I have done? It's that simple. Like for the example of the shoulder one. Okay, I put my hand in that position. Could I have made that save? Probably not. Like I just like, in all honesty, I recognize that the action was extremely unlikely. So I actually noted then, okay, if I can't lift the glove like that, maybe I hold my glove high. And then that worked. Now, this is like getting into details of the sport, but then I know I'm at risk for a low glove, but that's just the risk I would make. But I at least would assess things, right? You know, there'd be other positions where it's like, hey, how was I not in the right position? Oh, because I didn't move far enough out. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. So when you have this in like a sport and you're like an athlete, let's say, you know, it could be boxing or hockey, you would actually have an opportunity to go to practice, right? So go to practice. Okay, well, we got to work on our dump and chase. We got to work on our 2-on-1, 3-on-1, and it's goalies. They're going to work on these individual things. I need to work on this angle, block shots, tips, whatever, and they'll get guys to work on their weaknesses. Well, I don't really get to do that, right? Everything's going to be on the fly. And so I had to be extremely aware of, okay, this was the scenario, this was the problem, and I got to recognize and memorize it, which was really cool because I specifically remember a really, really like simple movement where I was beside the post, and the guy fed it out front, and it went in really easy because I didn't go out and challenge the top of the circle to get the angle. And that's like, that alone needs to be really embedded instinct of, okay, move out. Like, just don't even hesitate, move out. And so I just literally, after the goal, I'm like, if I see that position again, and I just froze it in my mind, I have to go out. And then in that same game, it happened, and I went out and I stopped the shot better because I took down the angle. And I had to keep reminding myself, because it would still happen in other games, but it was so helpful that I was showing some little progressions like that. And I just want to play. That's one fundamental example. And there was many more that I would ask myself, what could I have done? What was the probability that I could have stopped it? And what can I do better next time? Take a deep breath, bring your best. There were so many things like that that I continuously rep after rep, and trust me, it's not like it was an unlocking key. I feel like this has such a parallel to those trying to lose body fat. But the big thing that I don't think that people losing body fat or getting stronger in fitness don't do enough of is, you got to ask yourself what you're doing wrong. You do. You got to ask yourself what is not fitting in your formula. And in life, like, if you don't take responsibility for some idea that you haven't executed appropriately, do research. I mean, there is a lot of info here. I try to provide the info, and then ask yourself what made you do the action you did. Like, this is a whole nother side tangent. I could have it on another episode, how much more I'm learning about myself and food. And what I started to do was just keep putting in those reps, and bit by bit by bit, it got better. I will honestly say, and this is, I try to be honest on this podcast, I smoke weed, and there's so much pressure that goes into goaltending. And so my logic was, all right, let's get baked and not think about it. And it helped. It tremendously did, because then I stopped overthinking my things, because I was, am I right spot? Is he going to shoot there? And then if you don't want them to shoot, they're going to score, because it should be an anticipation. I want you to shoot here, so I'll be there. So there's a completely different body readiness for it. And yeah, I was able to calm down, and that was probably when things started pivoting better. Still had some bad games. It wasn't smooth sailing, but it was significantly better. So every game got a little better. Again, some games where I just wasn't there. And another major thing that I had to learn for like months was, don't have any leg day within 3 days of a hockey game, and you'll play a lot better. And it was very true. I was always trying to squeeze in some squat days, and maybe I can handle this, and terrible. Like, just, the quads are not, are very pivot. Like, I could do a lot with like deadlifts and same day, and it wouldn't affect me. But if the quads are tired because of the drive and the flexibility you need, you're not going to respond. It's just not going to work. And so after all those hard learned lessons, as we got closer to playoffs, I felt better and better. I felt right. I felt like I was being myself way closer again. And not to mention that this league is at a high, in some sense, a higher caliber to the hockey I ever played. Some of the, like, beer league is going to be very mixed, because you're going to have calibers of players that never played any double or triple A. They played probably, local hockey, but you're in the division that we are in, we're going to have some players that also play junior. And that's really kind of what makes this league what it is you have a mix of junior with some average folk. And the more juniors that you have, the higher the league you're going to be in, right? Your ringers. We had a good amount of juniors, so that was good. That for our team, just needed a goalie. And so cut to, I start to figure it out. Now, the thing that I want to really amplify here is how bad I felt, because I can still remember not that long ago. I don't think it was that long. It was still pretty late in the season. I was starting to feel better. Like, I was starting to have some good games. I was starting to feel awesome. But then I'd have a bad game again. And that feeling of weakness and powerlessness, and what am I doing here? I'm quitting the sport. Like, all those voices come into my head, like, so potently. Like, the word quit just sounded so good. And I hated being out there on those days. Take a deep breath and say you have no choice. Bring on the next puck. And that last part there is imperative. And I honestly, I have to say that I'm very proud of myself for that approach. And I'm very, very grateful that I made that decision, probably near 20 years ago to say yes to being a goalie. Because when things are bad, when I feel terrible, helpless, I just want to quit whatever I'm doing. I also know I got to take a deep breath because I don't have a choice and ask for the next puck, next opportunity, next thing I can do and I can control. And what was really good about that, one of the last games I can remember that was really bad, is I still took that approach. I still said, okay, bring on the next puck. And even when I knew this isn't my day, I'm not doing good, this isn't going to go well, all of these things that make you feel, insecure, just hopeless, I was still asking myself to do better. I wasn't hanging it up. I never had a game this entire year, and I honestly will say this, I didn't have one game that I said, just fuck it. Like, I don't care. I never did that once. I certainly would let go of the result more and more, but I always wanted to find some room of control. I always wanted to bring some level of, I gotta try to do better. And I gotta actually just think about this in your life. Like, I gotta say, I haven't been challenged like this so routinely outside of my business itself, but so routinely. My business challenges me. Don't get me wrong. Online training is a competitive thing, but like every single time I was out there, for the most part, so many reps of being tested and not succeeding is a really hard thing to do. And so I'm extremely grateful I did this. And I knew this at the start. I knew that I was going to be so grateful because I was going to get through it. It's another thing. Like, I'm not trying to toot my own horn too much here, but I mean, all of these practices that I've learned over the years just got tested to the max, because I said to myself at the start, when I wasn't playing good, I wasn't doing great, and you would never think that I would be the goalie that could help us, get through the playoffs by any means. I said, I think I can. I think I'm like destined to get better because I know this sport. I was a good goalie. And so I stayed focused on that belief. I just never let it go. So slowly but surely, I got better and better, started putting in better and better games. Still had some bad ones. Still had to just say, I can't control too much of this. I just have to put the next step forward. And so we get to the playoffs. And at this point, I'm actually feeling a little like, okay, it's playoffs, like a little bit nervous, because this is another thing that I mentioned before. When you go sub for a team and it's not your team, like you're not really worried about letting them down. So it's actually easier to perform because there's way less focus on the performance. It's just be, right? And that's the ideal, just be, right? And if you could just be, well, that's great. But if there's, inherently there's a consequence to you not being able to perform because you got to see the guys again, well, that's going to be a challenge, right? So playoffs had that little kind of buzz to it. Now, I each game was a little bit tense, but I felt like I played good. Like near the end of the season, I felt like I was having some great games. And in the playoffs, ironically, I found the best version of myself. And it was amazing because not only, like, even going into the playoffs, I'd still have some bad games here and there, or just I wasn't always happy with my result. Like, I wasn't always having a complete game. Maybe I do good for two, kind of like a little bit worse in the third, like just taking responsibility, no different, right? Like if I do really good in the first two periods, and even though we win, but I didn't play good in the third, I still got to learn from that. Just like I got to learn when it's, terrible game, I have to learn from all of them. I have to learn from the other ones too. I always ask myself, again, as I mentioned, what can I do to control? But I ask myself, like, what are the odds I should have been able to stop that? I always give myself a chance. It would be a 1% chance, right? And I'll even say it's like, person that I am probably isn't going to get that because I'm not that big. I'm not that skilled of a goalie. I'll be honest on that. But I'll give myself an probability chance, right? And even on bad games or on good games, when we win, I still had to hold that responsibility. So I was still wanting to really bring my best effort in playoffs. I thought I could do good. And I felt like I did really bring one of my best forward. So we won the first two, went good. None of the games were inherently super easy, but we handled them pretty well. Went to the next series. I believe that one actually was a 3-game series. Maybe it was 2-game series. I think it was a 3-game series, actually. Um, it was very bad. And I actually didn't think we were going to win that series because in the first game, we barely won in OT. No, in a shootout. Sorry, in a shootout. And that was very tense. Like we were up, they scored, OT, went through OT, shootout, and we won. And so then in the next game, and this was actually really cool, I actually made one of the best saves I'd ever made. Now, we didn't win that game. So that was the unfortunate thing. I've made one of the biggest saves I ever made resulted in us winning. So it's hard to say that it was as significant as that, but it was like a diving paddle save, and it was pretty cool. But again, just to be able to be that goalie, because that's who I was when I was a kid, you're a small goalie, okay, 5'8". And this year, really, like when I look at another 5'8" goalie, I'm like, wow, why did I choose this position? This is not a sport for a short person. Not a good position for a short guy. But you could be dynamic because you're short to the ice. You're more explosive inherently. You're going to have that ability, and so you can't do as much just angles purely. You have to be explosive and dynamic. There's also a bad habit I had of like giving rebounds. So I had to be, but I had a habit of doing that because I would do it during practice to shut guys down and get it's like a bad habit, but it looks good. So I started to get those moments again. And then we ended up actually beating them in the third game. We go to finals. Now, finals, we won the first game. Actually, I want to backtrack. That was the pivotal game, I will say. I think it was that game. I'm trying to remember which years, but this is more important. It doesn't matter which game because I might be losing you on this already, and I don't want to. It was we were actually down already, so we were up in goals. Okay, our team was winning, and we were. I was already getting a lot of shots, so I was playing good. But then it was currently at this point 5-on-4. We get a penalty. It's 5-on-3. Okay. And then this guy parks his ass in front of me and I sticked him because normally you can slide in a little slash to the balls and the guy doesn't want to stand there as much. Turns out that the ref easily saw it and I didn't think he was going to like see it. So guy kind of sold it and there was no other defenseman to screen his view. So I got a 4-minute penalty when we already had a 5-on-3 against us. So I caused the team to be nothing but in the box at that point. And we're only up by 1. Well, I got tested. And I think like if there's anything I have to be proud of this whole year was that day. And the really funny thing is, even at the start of playoffs, I was saying to my friend, like, yeah, I don't know, I might have to tell you I'm not doing hockey next year. I feel like it's great and all, but I really want to just power lift and train and all that stuff. And I got to tell you, after that game, I knew I couldn't quit this because what a rush. Ended up shutting the guys down. Some of the saves I made I was just in the zone. I just honestly was. I was present. I was myself. And it's priceless. It is priceless to be in that zone and challenge, like where you're going in a little afraid of playing this game because you want to play well, and then you still bring your best despite fear, despite concern for the result. Coming from the guy at the start of the year who honestly you never thought he played goaltender in his life to being the guy that actually helped get us to the finals. I helped win the first game, second game, not so much. And I can't take like, I won't say I couldn't have won that game for us. I could have. I think I played good and I could have played better. Like, again, I take responsibility in some odd percentages to some degree. And it was a weird game, a lot of penalties. But then I had to go to Nashville. So I couldn't go to the final game, and the guys ended up winning. So in the end, I feel like I did what I set out to do, not as purely and as triumphantly so I could hold the cup. That is the unfortunate truth. But I do have the cup here. And my friends, did get to win the cup. They got to win the championship this year. And to know that I was an integral part of that is quite priceless. Especially, you wouldn't have thought it. And I embrace that. I embrace that the odds were against me from day one, from the rusty skates. And then we fixed the skates and equipment. Now whose fault is it? Well, it's mine. I have to self-improve. I have to test my ego to the maximum. And I was able to find new character again. And I would even say, not even just, becoming who I used to be, better, essentially, because I'm bigger, I'm stronger, I'm in a more competitive league, and I'm smarter. And I actually even thought of that during the year. I'm like, you can't be the same goal. You have to change. You're physically so different, and this is a different league. So you have to change. And I embraced that. And so after that, the even just getting to where we got to, us getting to the finals. I mean, I certainly wanted to wrap it up with the guys, but I had to go to the conference, and knowing that they won, I got tingles when I got that video. It's like that they actually won the championship. And, I do know I was a big part of it. So that's a priceless feeling. And again, I just wanted to talk about being able to overcome that challenge. And I hope this story does give you some mindset and how this has so many parallels to life. And it is one of my best qualities. Again, I'm tooting my own horn here a fair bit, but to be able to handle stress, to be able to handle a really shitty situation, and to say, okay, that's what it is. Feeling the shitty emotion, it's not going to change. And, I guess years later, I learned that this is Stoic philosophy, but fundamentally just paying attention to the emotions, acknowledging that they're there, but don't let them drive you. Like deal with it like a tidal wave of shitty emotion, a big, cold, wet plunge, and then let it blow by. And it might not even blow by quick, but they're only temporary. And that the situation is unavoidable. So what do? You ask, first off, what could I have done? And what can I learn from then? How do I better apply that next time? Okay, where's the next puck? And again, this is really going to help you with life. This is going to help you with your training. This is going to help you with your nutrition, because especially with nutrition, you're going to make mistakes. That you're going to probably not going to get your results. You might, maybe if you're trying to lose body fat, the most common thing is overeating, right? The most common thing is coming into, I wasn't supposed to overeat and I overate. I got stressed and I overate. Well, what could you have learned from, right? I mean, I've talked about my binge eating on here before. Have you tried to learn from those experiences? And that is on you. That is literally your responsibility to learn. What led to the situation? No one can teach you that. You have to ask that question. And then you might see some change. And little by little, you start to see that change. You start to see a different person, because that's what you want. You want to create a new person. But it's like chiseling away, chipping away bit by bit, and just appreciating what you can control and what you can't. With strength, it's the same thing. When you're trying to get stronger, what can you control? Well, you can control showing up. You can control making time and making it a priority, making sure that you appropriately focus on the strength training. If strength training is a technique, and I hope you always appreciate that it's about how well you move the weights with the appropriate joint angles. It's not just how heavy it is. It's not just how hard you go. It's how well you do things, and then how hard are those things. And so if you apply that mindset to those main tactics there, you're going to see a big difference. And just in life. And I'll just come back to how this has been always, like from the get-go, one of the best decisions of my life. Because when the worst things happen, I utilize that formula every single time. And it's not even if life's going to get shitty, it's when. So, with that being said, I want you to really think about how you're practicing it, if you do or don't. And maybe consider this. Consider, should I try a new sport? Should I try a new skill? If you have the time, could be really worth it, because I honestly, made me appreciate what sport was doing for me this whole time. What boxing always did for me. It gave me a passion, something I had to work towards. Some days I go in and get my ass kicked. Okay, what do I got to do better? And then I do better. Oh man, I think I got the sport figured out. Go in there, new guy. Okay, I got humbled. I got to figure this out. And I hadn't had that in a while. Hadn't had that in a long time since I played. I'll say this. I did have a couple of years where I played out and it didn't go very well. There was some fun games, but again, the whole skill development side of things was always really challenging for me. But for the most part, this was probably one of the coolest experiences. And, like I mentioned, there's no way I can't play next year after having that kind of a rush and finding this side of myself, especially just, I know when I was going into the rink is when I think I made that call. Well, actually, definitely after I got the adrenaline rush of winning. But when I was going into the finals, especially, it got even more tense to me, of like just carrying that fear in a good way. It's like, hey, I used to actually think fear was a bad thing. Never used to like it. But now I'm like, wait, no, this is a good thing, because I got to get used to being afraid of things in life and still being present. One of the things I probably mentioned on here before, but I got to talk about this story again because Brent Butt said it really well. I had asked him, does the fear ever go away before pre-fight anxiety? Pre-fight anxiety for boxers, so terrible. It is, your stomach's in a knot, like you're anxious, more and more, hour by hour, closer you get to the fight. And I'm telling you, like days, it could start a week away, 2 weeks away, depending on how close you are to the fight and the person. But for sure, the day of, your stomach's in a knot all day and you just want to get it over with. And I had asked Brent, so does it go away? And he just said, no, it's always there. You just get better at handling it. And now this was, a national level, like he won gold at nationals, over 74 fights, 75 fights, I think, maybe more. And this guy who had been through it 70 times, and like so many rounds of sparring, like so much high intensity competition, traveled all over the world, national level. And he said, yeah, you still get fear. And so it was like a real humbling story. And to hear that, like, I mean, Mike Tyson says it, if the guy says he's not afraid, he's either lying or crazy. So being afraid of something that you're doing is a good thing. And I'll say that this again is where goaltending really helped me frame up things in a different light. Like it's a good thing to go through the bad game. It's a good thing to go through all the bad days of your life. Embrace that tidal wave of shit. What can you learn from it? And how can you grow from it? Become a new person. So I hope that this episode, although, it's really just more of a personal vlog here about my trials and tribulations in the net, but I hope it does tell a good story in a good light, and shows a bit of what I go through as far as like trying new things, going into discomfort. And it's so good for you. I can't preach this enough. Just choose something. I've never done a half marathon. Go do it. Like, train for it. I'm not David Goggins telling you just go do it, because I've heard that before. That's a terrible idea. Don't David Goggins, just go run half marathon, train for it. If anything, the training is a big part of the process because you're trying to get better at it. But try something that you're curious about and something that you're a little afraid of, because being afraid of fear is a big problem. But if you're not afraid of fear, well, that's a strength, isn't it? Being willing to embrace discomfort, that is a whole huge character trait. That's going to lead to so much more for you in your life, right? There was a really good episode on the Human podcast, and I can't remember the gal, but I'll have to leave it in the show notes. I'll leave it in the show notes if I can remember. And she talked about stress and how the mindset of stress. and how people view stress is so inherently different, because you can identify stress as being something that is bad for you. We hear it all the time. Oh, stress is bad for you. It makes you gain weight, leads to heart issues, all this stuff. But then you can also play it up and say, well, stress is actually good for you. It makes you challenge. It makes you stronger. And it's a big, big character trait of the Marines and soldiers, is that they see stress as good and they can manage it. And so, not that we have to be to a Marine Jocko Willink extent, but I really admire that mindset. I remember a nice little reel or video Jocko Willink had, embracing the chaos. And it was, things aren't going well? Good. Things aren't going to plan? Good. You got to adjust? Good. Things are stressful? Good. You're going to find a way to make that a better thing in the end. I always say this, that the scars of the past are the strengths of the future. So see the stress, see the fear, see the challenge as a good thing for you and where you're trying to go. And again, I really hope that this wasn't just a random vlog and a rant session, which some of them tend to be. But I think that there's some really tangible lessons in there. I tried to pull the parallels as much as I could. And it's up to you to really look within yourself. I'll send this call to action for you. Do your own personal journaling and meditation. If you don't already, you should. I'm not saying that you have to write in a journal every week or every day. Certainly, like some people do it every day. Good for them. I think that's awesome. But I try to do it quarterly. I try to do it monthly, but it's closer to quarterly. But man, you really find out a lot about yourself. So go do some journaling if you can within the next week. Simple ask, 10 minutes. Put on a clock, 10 minutes. That's all I got to do. And you're probably going to end up doing an hour. But I want you to describe a story to yourself. Think about a time in your life that things didn't go well. And you had to manage that stress. Maybe you even took some responsibility from the stress, but you were able to recognize what you did wrong. You were able to take responsibility for your actions, but you're also able to keep composure in the moment and then take the appropriate action of controlling what you can in the immediate next moment that you had an opportunity to. And I want you to really reflect on how much that happens in your life. I want you to try to write that story out and remind yourself of that. But then start doing that on a daily basis or any time you get an opportunity to look at a stressful event. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Oh, I'm angry. Okay. I wasn't ready for someone to cut me off. I can't control him. I can control my speed away from the next person and keep my peripherals going. Okay. Next opportunity. Simple as that. You see how that scenario that wasn't even within your control inherently fully, there is a partial control you could have had, and you can take that to prevent you from running into someone else later. It's a good thing it happened, right? So I want you to try to hopefully get that lesson from everything else that I ranted about today, is that any bad scenario has a good lesson. And so with that being said, remember to like, subscribe, share this with anyone that is interested in hockey, especially. They might appreciate this story. And I really hope that you learned something. But more importantly, really always remember this mindset, because it's a part of what we talked about, being able to handle the stress, handle the will, and move forward. It is not about the pursuit of happiness. It's about the happiness within the pursuit. And I'll catch you next time.